You're listening to The End of the Road in Michigan, the podcast uncovering the forgotten, unusual, and fascinating stories that shaped our state. For a few remarkable decades, this quiet Oakland County town became one of the loudest summer destinations in the Midwest. Long before roller coasters and dance halls, Walled Lake was farmland and forest. The lake itself, formed by retreating glaciers, carried a strange feature beneath its surface, a ridge of large stones that early settlers believed looked like a wall. The name stayed. By the mid-1800s, a small village stood near its shores. There was a general store, a blacksmith shop, churches, and a one-room schoolhouse built of stone. Families farmed the sandy soil and cut timber. Life moved at the pace of horses and seasons. Then the railroad arrived. By the late 19th century, tracks connected the village to Detroit and points west. Trains carried milk, produce, and passengers. With the rise of the automobile in the early 1900s, something else arrived: freedom. Workers in Detroit, surrounded by factories and smoke, could now drive 25 miles and reach fresh water and open sky. Walled Lake became the first popular beach west of Detroit along Grand River Avenue. On hot Sundays, Model Ts lined the road. Families unloaded picnic baskets. Children ran toward the water. The town's population swelled every weekend. Opportunity followed the crowds. In 1919, two brothers, Jake and Ernest Taylor, opened a small dance hall and bathhouse near the south end of the lake. It was simple at first: a wooden floor, a bandstand, and room to gather. But the timing was perfect. The First World War had ended. The country was restless and ready for music. A rival soon emerged. Herman Chenkush, a Detroit businessman, built his own pavilion across the road. Competition sharpened ambition. Floors grew larger. Bands grew louder. The crowds grew thicker. By the mid-1920s, Walled Lake's shoreline pulsed with life. One pavilion was rebuilt into what became known as the Casino Pavilion. The word casino meant something different then. There were no roulette wheels or card tables. It was a ballroom, a place where couples danced shoulder to shoulder under electric lights. Nearly 1,000 people could pack the floor on a busy night. Big bands traveled from Detroit and Chicago. Young men in pressed shirts asked young women in summer dresses for the next song. Parents sat along the edges, watching. The lake breeze drifted through open windows. In 1928, a mirrored ball hung from the ceiling and cast spinning light across the dancers. It was a small detail, but it felt modern. It felt bold. And then came the rides. In 1929, Walled Lake Amusement Park opened with a wooden roller coaster called the Flying Dragon. Built along the shoreline, it rose high enough to be seen from across the water. Riders climbed its steep track, crested the top, and dropped toward the lake with a rush that left them breathless. The park offered more than thrills. There were concession stands, midway games, a carousel, and speedboat rides. For 15 cents, visitors could skim across the lake in a powered boat. On summer nights, the Ferris wheel glowed above the crowd. All of it stood just steps from the dance halls. Walled Lake had become a complete experience. Swim in the afternoon, ride the coaster before supper, dance until midnight. The timing of the amusement park's opening was both fortunate and cruel. It debuted just months before the stock market crash of 1929. The Great Depression would test every business in America. Yet the music did not stop. Even in hard times, people found a few coins for escape. The Casino Pavilion added radio broadcasts. Bands played live over the airwaves. The park adapted. It built longer piers and expanded attractions. The lake remained open and welcoming. During one of the bleakest economic periods in American history, this small Michigan town managed to keep joy alive on its shoreline. It did not ignore hardship, but it offered a pause from it. By the early 1930s, Walled Lake had hundreds of summer cottages within walking distance of the water. Main Street featured grocery stores, ice cream parlors, a drugstore, a bank, and 2 hotels. Visitors could spend the entire season here. Some did. Teenagers from Detroit rode streetcars and trains out for Saturday nights. Returning home after midnight, they carried stories of music and moonlight. For many, Walled Lake became part of growing up. The Flying Dragon rattled through the 1930s, its wooden frame creaking under load. The dance halls booked national acts. In later years, performers who would become legends stepped onto that stage. Long before rock and roll reshaped American entertainment, Walled Lake had already been hosting crowds that demanded energy and spectacle. But time shifts. World War II altered the rhythm of American life. Gasoline was rationed. Young men left for military service. Travel slowed. The dance halls closed temporarily. When peace returned, the country was different. Television entered living rooms. New suburban developments spread outward from Detroit. Public pools opened closer to home. The draw of a long drive to the lake faded. The amusement park continued into the post-war years, but the era of peak crowds had passed. Fires damaged sections of the park in later decades. Structures were removed. The roller coaster came down. The casino pavilion eventually fell silent. What remains is memory. Walled Lake today is quieter than it was in 1929. The shoreline still reflects the sky. Boats still cross the water. But the roar of the Flying Dragon is gone. The sound of 1,000 dancers moving in unison has faded into local history. And yet the story holds. It is the story of a farming village that saw an opportunity and seized it, of entrepreneurs who gambled on music and motion, of Detroit workers who needed a place to breathe, of young couples who met under summer lights and remembered it for the rest of their lives. Walled Lake was never the size of New York's Coney Island or Cedar Point. It did not claim national headlines, but for a generation it was enough. It offered laughter at the water's edge. It offered rhythm in uncertain times. In the end, perhaps that is why its history still resonates. Not because of scale, but because of feeling. Because for a few decades on the western edge of Detroit's reach, a small Michigan town built a stage where ordinary people could feel part of something larger. Walled Lake, Michigan, a lakeside town that once glowed with music, motion, and midsummer light. Thank you for listening to this episode of The End of the Road in Michigan. To find out more about the history of Walled Lake and its famous amusement park, look for this story and sources on thumbwind.com. If you enjoyed today's story, consider subscribing and leaving a review. It helps others find the show. You can read more about this episode, see photos and sources, and explore additional Michigan history at thumbwind.com.